So we should start. So I need Mahulena, Elizaveta, Mathias, Paul, and Chloe.
Oh, good.
So if you want to sit, I just have a few words and so just a few words of introduction. This is the first time in general meeting of the European universities that we have such panels. We are not so many this morning for two reasons. It's the last day. And secondly, there are other meetings still going on at the same time. But I wanted to let you know that you see these cams over there. So we are recording. And to let you know also, we are streaming for the European Commission. The Directorate General for Education wanted to have access to these two panels as a use case, because it would be the first time that they are looking at the moment. So it's a use case for them, and so we decided to make the system work so that it would be agreeable for everybody. And we'll let you know when it's on the YouTube channel from UNIVERSEH, so you can look at. And Arnaud is going to make some experts of the conference. Now, I'm finished. It's Chloe who will be the mistress of ceremony for all of you. I know that she has prepared quite a lot with you, so I'm happily, thank you again for being there. It's important for us in terms of image and in terms of knowledge transfer. And thank you also for accepting all of you, because I know that you are all very occupied, and it's something which is really appreciated forcibly from DEFIS and others, and also Mathias from the Luxembourg Space Agency, and Mahulena, and from the EIF, and from ESPI in Vienna. It's important for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. And good morning, everyone. I hope you're well awake after the party last night. Yes. A few of you decided to come, the other might join in the process during the next hour and a half. So my name is Galactic Chloe. I'm a science communicator and I'm aerospace engineer by training. I'm going to be your host for today. We're going to start off with the first panel on the topic of space policy in Europe and abroad. So today, Europe is at a crossroads in space policy between autonomy, collaboration, strategy, sovereignty. What should we do as a continent to lead in the space sector in the coming decade? This is what we're going to talk about this morning, in particular on the topic of how should we position ourselves in terms of competitiveness worldwide, as well as talking about sustainability, if we should lead in legal frameworks in that specific area. And finally, how we can enhance public-private partnerships in our continent. To discuss those topics, we have 5 panelists with us. Before I introduce them to you, I would like just to mention that we would like this session to be as interactive as possible. So if you're joining us here in person or online, please scan the QR code appearing behind me with your smartphone. We were going to have a couple of polls and questions throughout the whole panel, so we can as well gather a bit of your insights on the topics we will talk about. So to first introduce you to our panelists, I'm going to start off with Paul FLAMENT. Paul, you're a Belgian civil engineer specialized in telecommunications who has worked for over a decade at the European Space Agency on mission control and satellite development. And since joining the European Commission in 1998, you have served in various leadership roles, and currently you are heading the Satellite Navigation Unit at DG DEFIS. Thank you so much for being here with us. Then we have Elizaveta SHASKOVA. You are a research fellow at the European Space Policy Institute, or ESPI, seconded by CNES, where you work on education, space exploration, and launcher policy topics. You hold a degree in space engineering and physics, and you also serve on the University Advisory Board as an alumni pioneer. Thank you for being here. Then we have Mathias Link. Mathias, you're the Deputy CEO of Luxembourg Space Agency, where you are shaping and implementing Luxembourg space sector development policy with a focus on international affairs, regulation, research, education, and innovation. And for over 16 years, you have represented Luxembourg at ESA, the EU, and the UN, and you hold a PhD in applied physics originally. Then we have Mahulena HOFMANN. You're a professor of space law at the University of Luxembourg. So thank you for having us here this morning. And you're an expert in legal frameworks for space governance with a focus on sovereignty and international cooperation. And as well as sustainability, we have the time to talk about that afterwards. Last but not least, Andrea Marcello. So we hear from your name, you're not from Luxembourg originally, but you're a senior thematics officer at the European Investment Fund, where you oversee policy matters in digital and space technologies after joining as a mandate manager in 2016. You previously worked across intellectual property, licensing, and scientific research, and you hold a PhD in neurobiology originally. Thank you all for joining us for this session. I would like to kick off the panel by a little poll for the audience, and then we'll have some time to react as well. We would like to ask you, what should be Europe's #1 space priority for the next decade? So if you haven't had the time to scan the QR code before, you can scan it again above, or those just joining us, and tell us what should be the priority for space in Europe. Okay, we have one first word. Defense. That is something we can also talk about. Education, coming number 2. Also, don't be shy if you're joining us online. You can take part in the poll and tell us what you think Europe's #1 space priority should be for the next decade. Research, SATCOM, security. Maybe while our audience is thinking on that one, we can also reflect. What do you think? Oh, Andrea, yes, please use. Just to turn on, unmute, you just need to do like this.
Okay. So now it's on.
Now it's on. What do you think it should be, Andrea?
But first of all, I feel a bit humbled because I'm just a biologist among space engineers. I hope you will all excuse me if my technical knowledge is not on par, but I will try to give our point of view as a European institutional investor. So for us, I think these are all
just to make sure that you hold the mic here. Yes.
I think these are all all relevant priorities for us as a body of the European Union. We have one priority, which is to be able to compete with the rest of the world. We would like to create we dream that Europe will create its own SpaceX. Doesn't mean that it has to be a competitor of SpaceX, but a European champion, able to compete worldwide.
Priority, competitiveness. Mahulena, do you share that view?
I think that it can be hardly, one of the priorities can be hardly picked up. I think it must be a mixture, and it's difficult to have defense without educating the engineers. So I think it must be a mixture with some issues more important, some less, but I don't think that any of these topics can be taken out.
Yes, I agree. It's extremely difficult to choose one single priority. I would
okay, let's say one we cannot afford to neglect. One priority.
I would personally say more a clear vision overall for Europe and more cooperation in enabling this vision. Because if you know where you want to head, then maybe the rest, the entrepreneurship, the money, the defense, the security, the education can follow that kind of vision that, in my opinion, is lacking.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to this table. I'm very honored to be sitting among you. So to comment on these results, first of all, that it's nice to see education there, which is normal since we're here at an education event. Sustainability is the main word currently. I think I will comment more on that a bit later, but it's true that this is one of our main advantages, knowledges that we have in Europe, the sustainability. I see some words missing there that we do miss in Europe, and that I hope at one point we will see more. But yes, I think for me the main thing we should be focusing on is cooperation, if I had to answer this question, because as long as we can exchange, cooperate, we can actually decide what will be our priorities and set up the right ones.
Thank you. Paul? Yeah. You just need to unmute it. Is it green? Yes, so it's working.
It works?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right. So what is important? Let me be selfish. Satellite navigation. So I'm working on satellite navigation, and I think that when people get together on an important project, you have spillover effects on all what you see on that screen there. And I'd like to spend 2 minutes on Galileo. not the guy, the scientist who said that the Earth is turning around the sun, but on the satellite navigation project of Europe, of the European Union. That beast is operational since 2016, and it is the best satellite navigation in the world, built in Europe. Believe it or not, half of the world population is using Galileo. All of you here, without knowing it, you're using Galileo. It is 3 times more accurate than the American GPS. And contrary to the American GPS or the Russian GLONASS or all the others, this is a civilian system. It's built by civilians. It will be used by defense people, but it is civilian. So it was back in the year 2000 that people decided it would be important, it would be something strategic. That word is also very important, the strategic nature of things we do in space, and satellite navigation is really strategic. I could spend hours speaking about Galileo, but maybe one thing which fits well with this audience here, which is education. There is a very important story between universities and Galileo, and I will give you a few examples of that. First of all, on any satellite navigation system, to make it work, you need clocks, very, very precise clocks. We call them atomic clocks, nothing with nuclear, but it's built on some atomic principles. Who designed those clocks? You can't escape Swiss people to work on clocks.
You know, I come from Switzerland, and I have to agree with you.
There was a company created by a university in Neuchâtel in Switzerland, small company called SpectraTime. So it came from university. University teachers and university people created the heart of the satellite navigation system. And then those satellites are transmitting signals. You need to modulate the signals. The modulation, something called CBOC, was built by a university in Munich, Bundeswehr University in Munich. And then the last example is that on Galileo, we have a system which is an electronic signature of the signals. So it's what we call authentication. So people are sure they are using Galileo. This was designed, invented by a university in Denmark, Aalborg University, and a university in Belgium, the Leuven University. Well, I don't want to take
No,
all
I
the
think we can
time
end the
in my
panel
talks.
now. Next priority, satellite navigation. We all agree. Thank you for this. And interesting enough, all of the words that came up that are the biggest, so sustainability, entrepreneurship, cooperation, education, this is actually the topics that we're going to talk about throughout the 2 panels this morning. And let's dive in the first one, which is governance, space law, second one. First one, autonomy, competitiveness, and global positioning. And I want to start with just one other question for the audience, and I'm sorry, this is going to be probably a harsh one. Is Europe too dependent on foreign launchers and technologies? Is that a yes? Is that a no? It's more complicated than that? Do you believe that Europe is too dependent on foreign launchers and technologies? Okay, we're starting to get some data. For now, it's more of a yes or more complicated. But it seems that we have an audience that believes we might be a bit more too dependent on other countries. And Paul, I want to ask you the first question to you. How is the Commission interpreting the concept of strategic autonomy in space?
First of all, again, Galileo was a strategic autonomy in space. It works pretty well. In terms of Earth observation, same thing. We have something called Copernicus, this Copernicus Observatory with a set of Sentinel satellites. It is the best and unique Earth observation system in the world. Now, to come back to the question there, I would have answered it's more complicated than that, because effectively, all first Galileo satellites had been launched with a Soyuz launcher from Kourou. Then came Ariane 5, and we could make use of Ariane 5. Then at a certain point in time, we were looking for the new version of the Ariane launcher that was Ariane 6. But in the middle, we still needed to launch with some Soyuz launchers, because with Soyuz, it was pretty flexible, and we could place satellites where we wanted, etc. While Ariane 5 was such a big launcher that we needed to launch 4 satellites at a time. It was a bit more complex. So we were expecting Ariane 6, but Ariane 6 took ages. And in the meantime, there was this invasion of Ukraine by Russia, so we couldn't use the Soyuz launchers anymore. So we were left without a European launcher. And unfortunately, we needed to launch satellite because the constellation of Galileo needs new satellites, because satellites are aging like all of us, and if we want to improve the services, etc., we need to launch satellites. And therefore, we went twice to SpaceX. So it's neither a yes nor a no, it's a bit more complex than that. Things are now evolving pretty well because the Ariane 6 launcher seems to be very reliable, and we are going to launch 2 Galileo satellites on the 17th of December with that launcher. But effectively, it is recognized that there are not sufficient actors in that domain in Europe. And this is why, with the colleagues of the European Space Agency, we are now embarking in what we call a launcher challenge in order to have new entrants. There seem to be many new companies willing to play a role in that field. And also there are several European Union countries which would like to develop their own launch pads. And that is also, you see, the sector, contrary to what one could think 20 or 30 years ago, this is a sector that is really booming. Many people have ideas, only a few of them will remain. But we are at the moment where everybody wants to be in.
Because one of the, let's say, particularity of Europe is we are acting as one continent, but we are also several countries who also have their own strategic and sometimes their own national initiatives. And I want to ask that question to you, Mathias, because from Luxembourg's experience, what works well in, and what does not, in coordinating national initiatives with the European ambition in space? Is it green? If it's not green, it's not working.
Overall, European coordination works quite well given the complexity that we have. Indeed, as you say, Chloe, we have many countries that have individual space programs, individual space agencies. We have the European Space Agency, it was mentioned, with 23 member states, with associates countries. We have the European Union with 27 member states. Some of them are also in the ESA, but some are not. We have a multitude of new actors. Of course, EIB, EIF are pretty active, meanwhile, in space. We have the national space agencies. So it looks really complicated, and it is complicated. And but the good news is I think we have recognized overall that we need to move now. That time we don't have time to lose anymore, And certainly the invasion of Ukraine and these huge aspects on security and defense now played a role also in realizing this and pushing the button, to the accelerator button, let's say, in Europe. And in that sense, I think coordination works quite well. We just had over the past 2 days the ministerial conference of ESA in Bremen, with a record funding for the European Space Agency. It was also remarkable, and that shows how well the two institutions work together, that there was a big delegation from the European Commission there with the Commissioner itself. And of course, all these other organizations that we have in space were present. And it seems that there is a sort of wake-up call now that we have to move. And of course, I completely agree with Paul. There are some areas where we are world-leading, like navigation and Earth observation. This is very clear. But there are also areas where we are definitely not leading at all. And a launcher is a good example. And also competitiveness. We have now really a very strong competitiveness on a worldwide level. Which for Luxembourg is especially important because we have a space policy on a national level that is very much commercially oriented. We want successful companies. We have a few very successful ones, and we want, of course, to continue on that path. And I think for Europe's future in space, this is also a very critical component, and it was also on the slides at the start, is we need to be competitive with a competitive industry, and everything needs to be done to support our companies. And again, I think the good news are this has been recognized. Personally, I think we still lack a bit in terms of overall vision on where we want to go, what do we want to achieve, what's the European way in doing space, integrating also the sustainability aspects that are maybe stronger in Europe than in other parts. But I think we can combine them. And and I'll finish with that, one of the areas where it's very visible is exploration. We have for a very long time, we have relied on the US to lead in exploration, and they still do, together with China and other countries. But we have sort of followed the US in that domain. And now that we have let's say, a new geopolitical situation, it's not that easy anymore to just follow. And we have to develop an own vision, and that's certainly not easy to put all these different actors together, and especially develop a vision in that part of space that is extremely visible and is also has the potential to, I think, unite Europe also on a broader level and give a direction for Europe, and also very importantly give a direction for all these young talents that we have and for education. It's important to also know what we want to do in exploration. And there we are not yet there. Exploration was unfortunately one of the very few domains where we did not have a subscription at the level of what was expected yesterday.
I think this is a topic that we'll talk about as well with Elizaveta, but thank you for reminding us, first of all, of the complex ecosystem that we have in Europe in space. And it's true, just as a reminder, if some of the public haven't seen, the ESA Ministerial has got 22.1 billion euros, if I am not mistaken, so a record. But then if we go maybe a bit deeper in the different programs, and you were talking about exploration, Elizaveta, I want to ask you, where is Europe still competitive, and where is the gap widening?
Thank you for this question. And first of all, I wanted to comment on the previous one, that before the ministerials, I think you could have been afraid that with the rise of space for defense, countries would maybe prefer using their budget for defense for their own national defense instead of pulling it together on the European level. But during this ministerial, I believe it was clearly recognized that ESA has this mandate of doing also security and defense activities. So this is a good start, for sure. Also adding to the fact that in 2024, I think 50% of public investment went into defense in the space domain. And now to answer the second question about Europe competitiveness, of course, Europe is still competitive. It is one of the most experienced actors on the international level with state-of-the-art capabilities across a wide range of applications. Obviously, we have Galileo for navigation, Copernicus for Earth observation, but most generally, Europe is very good at everything concerning space for the planet and sustainability. We have great competencies in meteorology, and of course science is also in the core of European missions. Like, I'm just thinking right now of Gaia, which is my favorite one, and ended unfortunately at the beginning of this year. That resulted in over 13,000 scientific publications studying our near universe. And so we have these strong aspects in Europe, but these must not be considered acquired, but of course leveraged and continuously improved to ensure European edge on this. Because if not, it could lead to loss of capabilities, like we had this recent launcher crisis that we already talked a bit about, that showed us and still showing us the impact it could have. So this year, the US and China are already beating their records in terms of launchers. We had over 150 launches by the US in October. In Europe, we had 5, and among the other 3,000 payloads launched by the US, around 90 are actually European, launched by European companies, but also agencies. Yes, instead of using this money to develop our own launch capabilities, we have for now to give some also to the US, even if now we have Ariane 6, Vega C, and the European Launcher Challenge that hopefully will get us out of this situation. And then, yes, there are 2 other activities that well-established space powers are doing and were quite missing in the EU. Few years ago it was defense. Now, as we were saying, it is getting better. But indeed, there's space exploration that was missing in what should be European priorities in the next year. Indeed, also the money that was put on the table for the ministerial was not what the human and robotic exploration was expecting. However, this is an essential component of space power. It has numerous benefits for Earth, Europe, and humanity. For example, in terms of medicine, this one was present in the first poll. Also for energy. And yes, right now we don't have our own access to space. We have to follow and adapt to anything happening in the US. We have to bargain to get European astronauts to the moon. But congratulations to our German colleagues here. So yes, these are for the different domains, but then in general, to do space activities, we do have the experience and the talent, even if the retirement and aging of European population will be another challenge to solve. So people to do the activities, we have them for now. However, we are also lacking of the raw and advanced materials to do space activities that are essential for that. I think this is one of the main issues for Europe to be really autonomous and competitive. We are dependent on the international markets heavily, and these are influenced by the geopolitical situation, which was quite unstable lately. So actually also space exploration and particularly ISRO, that I believe is a subject that is very interesting here in Luxembourg. That could be one of the solutions to this challenge.
Thank you so much for this overview, Elizaveta. So if I, let's say, may summarize very, very quickly, if I understand this, we're very strong in navigation and Earth observation. Maybe we're lacking, and we need to move forward with launchers and exploration. And you were saying as well, Mathias, that maybe we are lacking a bit of vision of what's the European way, although ESA has a strategy to 2040 right now. And my question to all of you would be, what do you think prevents Europe from moving faster? Is it a question of coordination between the member states, or is it rather cultural or appetite for risk, for instance? Maybe, Andrea, I want to ask you that question from an investor perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, but maybe just 2 words on what is our role as a European Investment Fund. to give some background. So we are an investor, and we are part of European institutions. The European Commission is one of our main investors, so a client, and DEFIS is one of our counterparts. What we do, we invest in venture capital and private equity funds, who in turn raise more money from the market, and then they select companies according to, for example, our to an investment strategy which is agreed upfront with us and with the other investors. For space, we are investing in this multi-annual financial framework. So until 2028, we have a budget of around 600 million, and because of our business model, this translates in a couple of billions at least that will reach European space companies. So this is how we support the market. We are not engineers, we cannot give technical assistance, but we provide the finance, basically. So what we see, and what we're trying to do, and this, I connect to your question, on one hand, we want, as I said earlier, to eventually support a European champion that can compete worldwide, but because of how difficult it is, the space industry, so you cannot know upfront, you cannot wait for a company to develop and then support it or become a customer. We need to bet at early stage, and we need to spread our bet in a way. So, for example, talking about launchers, we have at least 2 or 3 promising launchers in the portfolios of all our funds. One is German, it's maybe the most advanced, it's ISAR, I think everybody knows it. It had its first test launch a few weeks ago. We are also supporting others, especially one, for example, one French one, one Spanish one. So we hope that by spreading the bet, we will eventually create a champion or more, hopefully. Now, so there is fragmentation, of course, which is a problem, because also, for example, the European Space Agency needs to coordinate all the space agencies from different European countries. There is some competition, of course, so it is difficult. It is a problem in a way that the US don't have, or China, or any other competitor. On the other, there is a healthy part in competition that allows us to support different options, different technologies that can provide a more complete or a more could increase the probabilities to build a competitive or more competitive actors in Europe.
Thank you. Thank you. And so talking about the European way and what is Europe's vision for the future, Paul, how do you reconcile EU's vision with ESA Strategy 2040 and then the national ambitions in Europe? Yes.
Okay, yes. Effectively, I wanted to talk about that because I have the impression, somebody said, well, there is a complex panorama of space in Europe. I always try to simplify this, and I think there is a way to do it. Take the ESA ministerial in Bremen, effectively 22 billion euro, but for what? For going to a moon of Saturn, which is called Encelade, for sending astronauts to the moon, for building an X-ray observatory satellite. So all, if you like, scientific mission, technological mission. So I would say that the European Space Agency devotes its energy to develop technology and make science projects. From the European Union point of view, space is a tool for what we do on Earth. We have satellite navigation. This is for us citizens, Earth observation for the planet. We are building up this new system called IRIS² for secure communication. And obviously, we are making use of the expertise of the European Space Agency. But you see, it's pretty easy ESA, science and technology, EU, space, for what we do on Earth. And then
If I may, Elizaveta mentioned that ESA is also getting a security mandate right now.
That we will see. That we will see. And I wanted to say a second thing with this governance model. The approach taken by the European Space Agency is an intergovernmental approach, which is every member contributes, but then they expect to get a return on their investment in the European Space Agency. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, it is just like this. And I believe the two models are complementary, which is then very good. But so it has enabled European countries to develop competence, knowledge, etc. The European Union approach is different. It's a community approach. Through the budget of the European Union, there is money on the table. And then when there are call for tenders, call for investment, the best wins. You see, and maybe this is why Galileo is so good. This is why Copernicus is so good, you see. So, two different approaches, they have both their merits, and in the end, in Europe, we are the best space nation in the world. Now to come back to one of the issues we might have, education is perfect. And the thing you see is that many students, when they have finished their studies in Europe, they fly to the States. And why is it so? Recently, there was a meeting between my commissioner, Mr. Kubilius, and a set of something like 30 industries, industry CEOs, big companies and small and medium enterprises or startups, and they all said one thing: what maybe misses in Europe is the ability to find financing whereby money is put on the table without certainty that there will be a return on the investment. I think one of my colleagues will later speak about the Cassini approach, and this is really trying to tackle that thing, getting funding without certainty that there would be results.
Indeed, that would be one of the topics of the next panel, where we'd be discussing on entrepreneurship. And we will have the opportunity to discuss as well together the public-private partnerships. But now I think this is a topic we could debate for the next hour still on. I would like to move on to the second themes, which is more linked to governance, space law, and sustainability. And for this, we have a new question for you. Should Europe lead with binding sustainability standards even if others do not follow? So you can choose between strongly disagree or strongly agree. Is that what Europe should do in the coming decade or not? And while you are voting, I would like to ask the first question to Mahulena, as I know this is one of your topics. So how well do current international legal frameworks, let's say, addresses congestion, debris issues, or space traffic management in general? What is kind of the state?
For this question, perhaps I should start saying what is space law and how it works in the practice. So
maybe if you can put it a bit closer. Yeah, it's. Oh yeah, thank you.
Now, I should explain in one sentence what is space law and how it works in the practice. In fact, all operators who would like to send something in outer space need some sort of license of authorization. And we are explaining where to get this license, under which condition, what does it cost, and what to do when the license was not given. So that's the core of space law. And to your question, so there are many ideas how the sustainability should be guaranteed. Unfortunately, there is not a consensus on the international level how these rules should be structured. So there are no global levels protecting the sustainability or protecting the environment. What is the Europe trying to do is to bring its own rules, and it was only this year that a very complex proposal of a European legislation was published, which brought very broad package of rules how to protect the environment, plus 10 technical annexes. And of course, it would be a big step forward if this document is adopted. It would really guarantee that every and each operator operating under the European flag would have to comply with many principles like space debris mitigation plan, like the rules for ending of the life of satellite, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. My question is, or what I had an experience speaking with the startups or upcoming operators, they are asking, we do not understand this document. It's so complex. It's complex even for a lawyer. Does it mean that if we go to the market, if we create a small company, that we have to pay lawyers who will help us to understand and to cope with these rules? This document, if entering into force, should be valid from 2030. So I heard from many students who are planning to create this startup, let's fly everything until 2030 before this enters into force, because afterwards we are killed, our business is down. So what I think is here we need really a good compromise between very precise legal binding rules. Myself, I needed many days to read all the detail of this document. So, and the standards which would really help and protect the sustainability. What I think we can do, we can formulate them perhaps as non-binding standards, and in the contracts with the operator makes the reference. So if you would like to launch from our jurisdiction, you have to comply with these non-binding standards and make them binding by this way. But perhaps it's too detailed answer.
Thank you. We can give it. And I want to ask you, Mathias, in Luxembourg, you've talked about one of the priorities being competitiveness. So how do you approach this topic? Do you think this would be, let's say, a struggle for companies, or rather an opportunity, maybe?
You definitely have to find the right balance, as Professor HOFMANN said. In Luxembourg, we have 2 space laws, and we are one of the few countries with 2 space laws. I think some of them have 1 law, and many have no space law. So we have, like Germany, for example, doesn't have a space law. We have the 2 laws. Of course, as I said before, we have a commercially oriented space policy. We want to make sure that the companies have a good ecosystem in which they can develop their ideas, their businesses. And of course, regulation and space law is part of that. So we try definitely to make our laws understandable and easy to implement, which does not mean, of course, that we compromise on sustainability issues. We have a very thorough process in place to check things like that was said on, for example, on debris mitigation, on making sure that the companies that operate the satellites have the right competencies to do so, on making sure that the companies have the right financial stability also to continue to exist. This is all working very well, and I'm not sure it was said, but in the end, Luxembourg is just implementing what it has to do from an international perspective. So the Outer Space Treaty is very clear on that. In the end, the country where the company is located has to authorize these missions and these different satellites. So we are implementing what we have to do. Now, regarding the Space Act from the European Union, we are in principle very favorable to having a sort of harmonization on a European level. We think that currently, I must agree with my previous speaker, it went a bit too far. It's very complex to understand, and it's not yet sure if with what is planned we will be able to remain competitive with other parts of the world, which of course for us especially, but for many other countries as well, is absolutely key. We cannot over-regulate. But at the same time, I'm certainly very much in favor to try to have Europe leading and go maybe a bit further than what others do and show that it is possible. And I think that's something that we have done also in many other areas outside space, and where we are able to find the right balance.
I feel Paul wants to answer on that, but before, can I ask you to clarify when you say it's going too far, it's too hard to understand? is that the legislation is too strict, or is it we don't explain it well enough for companies to implement it?
Well, I would challenge the companies present here and ask them what they think about this law and if they really understood all the implications to them. For us in Luxembourg, where it goes a bit too far is in terms of the process that is being envisaged for this authorization. Because again, we have a process that works. We also comply with certain international guidelines, like the long-term sustainability guidelines from the United Nations. So there are guidelines that, as was said, you can apply them on a national level when delivering an authorization. And of course, we are in favor to harmonizing these guidelines in the 27 member states of the European Union. But then, beyond that, we are not so sure if there is a central organization that is needed on a European level to implement these authorization procedures. That's just one point, but of course it's a very large document, and there are many points that still need to be clarified.
Thank you. Paul, can you tell us maybe a bit more about what's envisioned for this law?
Alors, I think what matters is to know where we are starting from. You know a place called jungle, or you know a place called Far West, back 200 years ago? Space today is the Far West. There is no law, everybody does as he wishes. There are no traffic lights. You know, it's very dangerous. There are no sheriffs, nothing. It's dangerous to go to space. Today, there are something like 10,000 satellites which are operating.
I have some data
Today,
showing
we have
behind.
something like 20,000 satellites which are in space, out of which 10,000 are operating. Within the next 10 years, we are going to launch 50,000 satellites. And we also know at the International Telecommunication Union that you have companies or countries filing to get an access to space. Today, there is about 1 million requests for sending things to space. And we know that there are more than 100 million objects orbiting the Earth of the size of a centimeter, which is pretty dangerous. So, I would not like to go to space in those conditions. I would like to go to a place where there are some rules. And the rules, first of all, is to avoid the congestion. You don't like to be in files, or you don't like to make accidents when you go there. So what do we want to somehow impose on the actors going to space? First of all, that they are able to make collision avoidance. You don't want that somebody launches a satellite and then, okay, it's there. No, because if there is an object which will collide with that satellite, you want to be able to remove the object, and the satellites have to have that capacity to move, which is not always the case today. You want to be able to track or to trace where all the satellites are located. Maybe not for the defense or military people, but otherwise this is something which is useful. You want that at the end of life of a satellite, that you remove it from there. If it is in low Earth orbit, you send it back to Earth, it will burn in the atmosphere. And if it is in geostationary orbit, you put it in a cemetery orbit. You know, these kind of things are useful. No, all that is in that thick Space Act document, but obviously it will not become applicable like this. There is the whole legislative process, and we know that the member states in the council, they are studying the document. Normally the Danish presidency of the European Union is willing to have a report on that Space Act by December, so in a few weeks. And we also know that the European Parliament got organized and they will have their opinion by the summer 2026. So things are progressing, but I think it is normal that the European Commission, in its role of initiator of something, says, okay, if we want to regulate that new field after Earth, air and maritime, space is a new field of activity. Okay, we should be able to do this, and this, and this. No, it's up to consultation, council, parliament, and in the end, we'll see what comes out.
Mm-hmm. And I think everybody pretty agrees on the panel or in the audience. We saw priority sustainability was one of the first to come out, that this is something we need to target. So I put a graph here with what actually the data you've mentioned in the 50,000 satellites coming, as well as a graph from the European Space Agency about what would happen if we continue business as usual, that you can see in red, or if we stop any launches today, as you can see in blue. So we know this is an issue. We know if we want to continue to use space as an infrastructure, we need to establish some ground rules. I guess the discussion is more around how do we establish these ground rules so that it remains viable for companies and that Europe can remain competitive. Am I correct, Mahulena?
You are absolutely correct, and I would not contest any of the necessities you mentioned. I absolutely agree. The question is whether we need this system of authorization through a network of very complex institutions. So if it is a European Union operator, must be authorized by a member state, by a technical body, then has to be registered in URSO, in the specific new registry of the European Union. If it is coming out, it must be authorized by European Commission, by USPA, and registered by URSO, and so forth and so forth. For all these procedures, the operator needs a lot of paperwork, needs waiting before the institution decides. So my question is not whether we need to contest whether we need to contest space debris. Absolutely we do, but the question is whether we really need these administrative procedures, which seems to me very long-term, very long-lasting, and perhaps too complex. Perhaps we shall think about another way how to organize this. Perhaps we could have more look on the ITU and the system of coordination in the ITU, which I see is not so popular, but I think it works well since the 19th century, and perhaps it would be a way where we shall learn how to authorize.
Andrea, how do investors see this upcoming regulation?
I think most have been said. It's always two faces, right? The rules, on one hand, can hinder development, can create extra administrative burden. On the other hand, in a way, companies also like regulations because they prefer, and I connect a bit to what Paul said, it's better to work in an environment with rules, with pros and cons, rather than working in the Far West where everything can happen and you're also not protected by the same rules that can be seen as a burden. So, as always, I see many parallelism, for example, in the AI Act, Artificial Intelligence Act, also was released recently. Similar issue in the sense that it's the biggest regulations in the world, which is welcome by some, but at the same time, the main critics, including some mega corporation, they said if this will hinder European competitiveness. And I think we are a bit, from what I heard, I want to be neutral. We're a bit in the same situation. I do have a question. I think all the reasons for the act, for space sector, are very reasonable. But I think, so it's a question and a comment. We need to have the other players to follow the same rules, right? So, because most satellites are launched by US, and more will be launched by China. So, if only the Europeans will follow these rules, I think the Space Act will be depowered. So it's a question of maybe if I'm allowed to rest.
Please ask the question. A hard one, though. Someone wants to answer that?
A very short answer. So according to the law, if it enters into force, if a foreign company or from a foreign state would offer a launching for a European operator, this company has to comply with the same rules as the others. So the company will be bound by the rules of this European Act.
But any satellite launched by a non-European company outside Europe doesn't have to comply with these rules, right? So if SpaceX launches 10,000 satellites, they will not need to follow the rules.
But if it would launch a European satellite, if it would launch a Galileo satellite, for instance, or Copernicus, it will have to comply with these rules.
Elizaveta.
Yes, I just wanted to add also that this EU Space Act is also an opportunity to shape international standards, especially at the time when US, for example, are putting sustainability issues quite aside. Now we have a lot of new spacefaring nations that are willing to also join the space race. And that are afraid of not being able to at one point because the access to space becomes more and more complicated with more and more objects in space. And so it's really an opportunity for them to turn to Europe as a trusted space partner to use our experience, our guidance, and yes, build strong relationships between Europe and these new spacefaring nations.
So if I understand correctly, you think that if Europe is leading in this sustainability binding agreements, then maybe some players like the US or China would not follow, but other players could follow the lead of Europe.
Exactly, to ensure that they get access to space.
Let's hope you're right. Yes.
Maybe one more point concerning the complexity of all that. If I were a European industry, I would have more difficulties with the fact that there is a space law in Luxembourg, there is another space law in France, another space law in Germany, and this is killing for our industry. So it's far better if you have a sort of single space market. And then it looks maybe complex because it is new. We've never done that before. On all those collision avoidance things, on this sustainability, environmental footprint, these kind of things. So these are new rules we're trying to set up. And effectively, we could use kind of ITU model, the International Telecommunications Union model. I mean, for Galileo, we are making use of ITU because we need frequencies, and this is discussed at ITU. ITU is super complex. It is super complex. This is really a specialist field, and you spend hours trying to get your frequency bands with the right. It's a super complex machine. So if we find ITU a good model, the Space Act will be very simple.
I also wanted to add that these sustainability provisions in the EU Space Act, it's also market opportunities for companies in Europe that are doing SSA or STM. That's okay for now. For example, they have to develop these technologies because of the European regulation, but at one point, everybody will need these technologies, and they will be already developed in Europe and ready to be used by other countries all around the world.
So not a challenge, an opportunity. I like that mindset. I would like to move on now to our last topic, which is more related to public-private cooperation and financing and innovation. So we've talked about a lot of regulation, but now moving on to what can Europe's financing mechanism be somehow enhanced, or can they truly support this new space growth? And for that, we have a follow-up question for the audience, which is, what's the biggest blocker to space entrepreneurship in Europe? Do you believe it's risk aversion, access to capital, regulatory burden, or lack of demand? I believe we may have a couple of CEOs in the room that are going to present afterwards in the next panel. So we will see what the answers are. And maybe, Andrea, you can also give your input on that question. What do you think are the main obstacles for early space or entering space companies in Europe today?
Sure. I just want to have a look. Yeah, I see.
Looks like access to capital is a strong number one.
Access to capital. Yeah, now I just wanted to check because risk aversion is also there, and the two are connected, right? Because many private investors, they don't want, rightfully, or they can't take the risk. And space is a very risky, business, in the sense that you need a lot of capex, right? You need a lot of investment, initial investment, without knowing if you're going to be successful, because all the startups, all these companies are developing companies. Some will succeed, some will not. So again, you cannot put all the eggs in one bucket. Private investors are a bit scared. Public investors need to be there. So we play a role, of course. We, the European Commission, I think the European Space Agency also plays a role, being the first customer. For example, ESA, they become customers even before a product or a service is available. That's how they take the risk, and this is essential, right? They act as anchor investors. Even in the US, it happens a bit the same, even if it's typically a more private-oriented ecosystem. NASA also act as an anchor customer. For example, for SpaceX, we have different scales, but the principle is the same. NASA recently, I think they awarded a 12 billion contract to SpaceX. In Europe, we have a problem of scale, but the idea is the same. So to support these developing companies with these new startups, especially at the early stage, with huge injections of capital, de-risking, in a way, the enterprise, so to allow the private investors to enter when product or the service of a company is a bit more developed and the risk is somehow mitigated. Again, one example, to go back to ISAR. ISAR received so far, I think, around 500 to 600 million of public investments. They just tried the first launch. It was successful in the sense that it launched, but then it didn't last long. But around 200 million, a little bit less than 200 million came from us. And this is the model we see going. So at the moment, it's just public funding, something similar to grant, because most of these will be lost. But some of these companies, they will survive, they will develop, and they will return, even from a financial point of view. These companies will return the investment to the initial investors, hopefully, in theory, also compensating for the investments that we lose by also supporting companies that eventually has to fail.
Mm-hmm. So importance of public investment, if I understand, to de-risk the technology, so that private investors.
For private investors to enter lately. And on space, more than on, maybe it's one of the riskiest industrial sector that I can think of at the moment, and also the one with some of the highest capital expenditures, investment needs.
Mm-hmm. We actually have some data courtesy of ESPI, thank you, on the ratio of public budget versus private investments, and we see there is this increasing trend in Europe. So maybe, Elizaveta, if you have a point of view from the ESPI perspective on how you see these types of financing increasing in the coming...
Yes, of course. Sorry. We're doing a lot of studies concerning investments, ventures, and space companies in Europe, and we've been interviewing some of them in the framework of these studies. Mm-hmm. What we've been told is that, of course, it's very difficult for European space startups to scale up in a fragmented market with actually around 15 different space laws, as we were saying before. So yes, having this united legal framework could help them create a stable and predictable competitive environment that is essential actually to innovate and grow. This clearness is absolutely essential, because even for them, they do not really sometimes understand the different mandates between the different European institutions. So this clarity is very important about who puts the money there and how they can get it. So yes, very clear priorities is the most important.
Thank you, Elizaveta. Procurement reform is often cited as a key way to enhance public-private partnerships. Paul, you've mentioned a bit of the way ESA works and the EU works. Do you think there is a way we could improve procurement so it would be easier for companies in Europe? No. Is it green? No, it's yellow. Yeah. Nice.
Okay.
Perfect.
On that one, yes, there is always a way to do improvements. For us, when we do procurement, what matters are the participating conditions, which is not really the way we procure, but participating conditions is very important because we want our autonomy in Europe. So we want to minimize the number of non-European countries participating into our projects, because in the end, it is a dependency to somebody else, and we really want to be sovereign. Now, the question on public-private partnership. On that one, I think it really depends on what you are talking about. And when I think, again, sorry for that, about Galileo, Galileo was born through a public-private partnership. Why was it born like this? Because in the early days of Galileo, some European Union countries wanted that Galileo would not proceed. Okay? We had somehow internal enemies for Galileo. And one way they found was to impose that Galileo would be a public-private partnership. But how can you bring the private into something where you do not sell services? Because there was the American GPS providing positioning free of charge. How could we, Galileo, provide something against a fee when there is another system providing it free of charge? So very complex. So the public-private partnership for something like Galileo does not work. It did not work, and it really nearly killed the project at birth. That was for satellite navigation. Nowadays, there is the Secure Communication Project called IRIS², and there effectively a public-private partnership is possible because there will be secure communication for government, but with the same infrastructure, you can sell commercial communications. And that, in that sense, effectively, you can have a public-private partnership. Now, it doesn't mean that it is easy to set it up. And there are many negotiations, discussions between the private and my colleagues of the public sector working on that project. It's really not easy to implement.
Matthias, what are your thoughts on, or Elizaveta, you wanted to
I just wanted to briefly react on different procurements because I think this is also something that must be improved, especially in terms of rapidity, since in the space sector we have technologies that change very quickly, that evolve very quickly, and especially with the new space and the appearance of space startups, where sometimes they apply for a call and they get an answer 1.5 years later when the business model have evolved, their technologies has evolved, or they even already disappeared. So this is one of the main things also to improve, to think about new ways of doing procurement.
Do you agree, Mathias? Do you see that with companies working in Luxembourg? Are we too slow with the procurement right now?
There's definitely improvements that can be done, and procurement it's indeed also a big focus that we put on, is to try to simplify as much as possible. We have a space agency, but we don't manage the projects ourselves. We use the European Space Agency for that. We have a national program that ESA helps us to implement, and within that frame we have optimized the procurement processes of ESA as much as possible, so we are generally much faster than a normal ESA program. So it's possible, and but of course further simplifications can be done.
Can I ask you, can you give us a bit more detail? How do you do it? How do you make it faster?
You accept more risk. This is definitely one way to do it, and we are able to do it in the national program because we try to look at the projects from a business perspective. So we look, of course, at the technology. that has a certain risk, but we also look at the overall business model and how the money at a certain stage can make money and can get private investments and make revenues. Of course, it's extremely challenging, it has been said. Space is difficult, you need high capex investments very often. So it is definitely challenging, and this is one issue we have in Europe is access to private investments. And again, this is unfortunately, it's not something that is space specific. It's a general issue that we have in Europe where we take less risk and we have less private investors that are willing to take these risks. But at the same time, we are progressing. I think I'm still very positive now that on many national levels, of course, but also on a European level, now with the initiatives between the Commission, EIF, also at ESA, I think there's much more awareness now that we need to support the companies in a better way and do it very quickly, because the global space sector is growing extremely fast. It's projected to triple by 2040. So this is a huge market opportunity for all of us. And of course, we do not want to see in space what we have seen in other sectors, like the IT sector, where it's very visible that the US are dominating on a global level. I think that's something we need to avoid in space.
I have a quick supplementary remark. We are working a lot with our colleagues from the European Space Agency, effectively in order to try to improve those procurement approaches, including making use of this methodology called Agile. But it is also bringing a lot of difficulties in the space sector. It would be too complex to enter into here, but we are obviously aware that it is important to adapt our procurement approaches. It's a tool, it's just a tool. It's not fundamental per se. It's important, and again, I put it back for the next panel where my colleague will be discussing about Cassini. But this is somehow something done in parallel, trying to invent new approaches. But for the traditional things we are doing, like Galileo, Copernicus, etc., we are simply tailoring the best we can those procurement approaches with new methodologies.
Yeah, public-private partnerships are a dialogue, and we will hear from the other end of the deal with the companies that are coming in the next panel, so feel free to hang around. Mahulena, I would like to leave the last word to you on that topic.
I just would like to confirm what Paul said, that for the outside world it's also confusing that the procurement systems of the European Union and the ESA are different, that the ESA is based on the geo-return principle, European Union on the free market rule, so also there is some need to explain it to the external world that they are cooperating organizations which are harmonizing these principles.
Yes, because we've talked about access to capital and risk aversion as, let's say, blocker to space entrepreneurship, but as you were mentioning, regulations can also be a blocker for companies. Do you believe it's the role of space law to also take that into account when you're drafting this type of regulations?
I think so, that when a country is preparing its national space legislation, don't think about Europe, but out of Europe, I think that the purpose is to make a legal framework which is easy to understand, which is reliable, which does not bring too much burden to the operators, but brings also some security and guarantee that if the operators fulfills the criteria described in the law, he or she will receive the authorization soon. So I think this transparency and also speediness in the decision process are two key points.
Thank you. Thank you very much all for your insights on those very complex and interesting topics. We'll now leave some room for our audience. If you would like to ask some questions, so feel free, it's the same QR code to type your questions directly in the chat, so we can still take a bit of time. We started a bit late, so we'll end up late to answer your questions on those topics. So as a reminder, we've talked about a lot of autonomy, competitiveness, global positioning of Europe, governance, space law, sustainability, as well as financing, innovation, and public-private partnerships. So if you have any questions on those topics or others, just feel free to type them in the chat. You can just scan the QR code and don't forget to enter the submit button so we can also have access to your question. Okay, we have a first question. How to simplify space law in terms of paradigm? Paradigm. I guess that is a large question.
I think you can have a very clear and simple space law and then make references to some technical annexes. So you can let the technical rules out of the core of the law and to refer to these annexes for simplification. So I think that the law can be very simple, saying what are the conditions for receiving authorization, how to protect space environment, today very important, and what will be the sanctions if the operator would not comply with the law. In Luxembourg, the sanctions are very high, even if the operator would not act without authorization. He or she may be condemned until 5 years prison. So it should be clear what are the consequences of not complying with the law. And then it should be also clear what are the means if the authorization is not given. So where the operator can ask for remedy, to which authority. And I think it can be very simple, one page.
One page. Regarding the sanctions you were mentioning, it's one of the critics that is made, you've mentioned, Mathias, of the Outer Space Treaty by the UN, where they're not really sanctions being applied if a country doesn't respect those rules, right?
So, in fact, each violation of these international law treaties can be dealt with on the international level. But to come to this international court is very complicated. It's very complicated. We do not have time to explain. So I think that you are absolutely right. They are on the international level. There are not sanctions, but there is shaming and blaming. The countries are meeting on many occasions. For instance, in the session of the legal subcommittee of the UN Committee for Outer Space. And if it is clear that a country or its operator was violating the international law, the atmosphere can be very hostile, and it can be very clear that such state is not a reliable partner anymore. So there are not any legal remedies on the international level, but it is this international atmosphere which can play a real and important role.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, that one, because effectively, for example, in terms of international space law, there is no obligation to register the object you launch to space, you put in space. But there is a sort of registry in Vienna for this Treaty of the Outer Space, and again, it is not an obligation to make use of that registry. 50 years ago, each time somebody was launching something, effectively, they put that information into the registry. But for the last 20 years, operators somehow understood or decided that there was no obligation, and that registry has got many holes, if you like. And I think a space law, as you said, one needs to understand what are the sanctions if you don't do it. On the outer space approach, it was no obligation, it was just a possibility. But if there is a space law, maybe it would be good to have some obligations or things where we understand what is the consequence if you don't do it.
Mahulena, you want to?
If I may just enlarge what you said, we cannot completely say that there is no such obligation. It is based on the registration convention. Luxembourg is part of this registration convention as many other countries. The problem is that this law said the state has to register as fast as possible or in the moment that is practicable, and then I share your view. So some countries think it's practicable to register at the day of the launching, And some countries think, yeah, it's still not practicable, we have some other things to do and let's wait for that. So it can take days and years, and some countries still do not find the moment that it's practicable. So in fact, I absolutely agree what you said. We have a legal obligation, but it's formulated in such a way that you can always avoid it. So this registry exists. If you see it, it's online. Luxembourg is registering all its satellites or space objects. But as you rightly said, it's far from being complete, and some states are really reluctant to register. Also, the content of this information is not very precise. So you would not find a lot about the description of the space object, of its function. So some states, even if they are launching a military object, they say it's space, it's satellite for research purposes. So for that, you can say everything.
Yeah, free to interpretation. Elizaveta, you want to quick react before we move on?
Yes, I just wanted to add another dimension to this question, that it's one thing to simplify space law, but it's also teach about space law early on for engineers, future entrepreneurs in their courses, so they know that a space law exists, that it's evolving, that they need to think about it, and yes, just understand the basic principle of it before starting their career. And this is where initiatives like UNIVERSEH that are interdisciplinary have their place and their role to play.
Thank you. And we'll also talk a bit about education in the next panel. If you want to, the next question we have from the audience. Awareness versus action. The EU must move faster. Our policies are driven by short-term interests. How can you enforce your lobbying? Awareness versus action. How can we move faster and move for more long-term interest and vision, I guess? Paul, do you want to answer on that one?
I would contest the need to move faster. You need to move with some willingness, define clearly the things, and I think we are very good at that in Europe. When we do something, we try to define it, we take the opinions from various stakeholders. It's maybe taking a little bit more time at the beginning, but once we are there, we have the best machines in the world. Galileo, Copernicus, very soon R². So I think we should be proud. Maybe this is something missing. We are not proud enough of what we do. And where we are maybe not good at is communicating. As I said, 4 billion people are making use of Galileo. Who knows that? It's operational since 2016. When I speak with relatives, they still ask me, oh, when will Galileo become operational? It's there since the last 10 years. It is the best system in the world. So maybe we should do more communication and be proud of what we do.
Proud of Galileo for sure. Do we agree? Are we moving fast enough? Yes? I'll ask the same question to the next panel. Let's see what they answer. Okay, next question. Next question we have to Paul, why public-private partnerships are so difficult or challenging?
I didn't, okay, I said for Galileo it was kind of killing the Galileo project, but then afterwards effectively public-private, well, simply for IRIS², for example, the private sector, so the companies which are participating in the project, they want to put the least money possible on the table and get as many benefits as they can. Okay, one needs to be reasonable, and it's a negotiation. Negotiations of this kind are never easy. I mean, I'm not in the finance. We have people who are better placed than me into that, but it's always complex to arrive to a stage where the two sides of the table agree, have clear visions of what they engage with, what are the consequences of the contract they are signing, what obligations that bring, what advantages they can get. So such negotiations are not easy because they deal also with a lot of money, with calendars which are not always 100% sure, because there is difficult technologies behind it. So it's all that. A lot of money, complexity in terms of technology. But what is important here with RE2 is that the need is there. The need is recognized, and the willingness to proceed is there. So at a certain point in time, okay, that the negotiations are finalized and all actors do work then.
Thank you. If we move to the next question, what could be the role or the contribution of UNIVERSEH in all the questions addressed during the panel? Role contribution. Elizaveta, maybe if you're on the board?
Yes, of course. So I think the first thing that UNIVERSEH offers is, of course, education. So educate about space law, for example, about the new technologies that will be appearing, creating links between researchers and students who work on these future technologies, but mainly also offer the platform for discussions to inform, of course, communicate about our different projects, our priorities, our policies, so everybody can be aware of the power we have in Europe and then make concrete decisions. So yes, actually also unite us, create these links. I think that's what UNIVERSEH can offer, and we're glad it's here.
Thank you. Okay, next question.
If I may, I think that the opportunity of UNIVERSEH is to learn from each other. There is a high level of expertise of all the participants, and it's great pleasure to have also discussions not only in the rooms but also in the corridors, and it's a great opportunity to learn also from other areas. That's its own, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we still have time for a couple of questions. The next one is, do you think the European Space Act will be applicable to non-European operators offering services in Europe, and is it a good idea?
I think it is a good idea. It is a good idea, and it is extremely important to have the sustainability rules and to have a European traffic management. The question is only if we really need this governance part so complex or so over-complex, and I don't see any difference whether it applies to European operators or non-European operators. So in shortcut, the substantial rules are very important, but I am asking myself whether we really need these very complex procedures.
I think, again, the answer should be as simple as possible, and I would take the example of toys. When you buy toys in Europe, they need to conform to some constraints. Little buttons have to be firmly attached to the toy, these kind of things. Okay, so even if those toys are produced somewhere else, in Vietnam, in China, in Argentina, they have to comply with the rules of the European Union. That's it. And it's good for us, it's good for all European citizens. So yes, I think but it is the case in the Space Act. Operators from non-European countries willing to offer their services in Europe, they have to conform to the law, which is normal.
Thank you. So maybe one last question before we have to conclude. Which suggestions for public university regarding dual use within space strategy? Do we have suggestions for public university regarding dual use? We haven't talked about so much defense and security. Do we have some insights? No.
I can try a bit from a policy or national policy perspective. Of course, I'm definitely not an expert now specifically for universities, but from a national space policy perspective, and definitely a European one as well, it's clear that you have to take this into account and try as much as possible to benefit from this new spending in defense and make sure that some of that spending, or even a large part of that spending, is used also for dual-use technologies that can also benefit the civil sector. So it's for us in Luxembourg, it should be a non-brainer, or for most of the countries to try as much as possible to do that. And of course, universities or public research centers in the end also work in the interest of the national, of the country where they are in, and also in particular of the national industry. So I suppose they should also consider that.
And actually yesterday we had the UNIVERSEH advisory board during which we talked a lot about this topic. It was quite unexpected, actually, because some members of the advisory board were saying that they had difficulties to recruit young generation in their companies if they're saying that they're doing dual use, if they're doing defense, because it's true that space for defense has been quite a taboo in the last years before the situation we are in now. Yes, a lot of young people are actually going towards space because space exploration, because science. And we actually did a talent study with ESPI not long ago, analyzing these motivators, why young people go into space. And we also saw that while in the beginning of their studies, students are more motivated by space exploration and science. It actually, as they advance, it decreases with a biggest interest in more Earth applications, navigation, Earth observation. So that was one of the interesting factors that we have observed. And what I wanted to say about defense is that yes, some students were reluctant to work on defense. At ESPI, we've also noticed that for policy students and young professionals, these are way more interested in defense. We, for example, did a essay competition this summer where we had 5 different topics. One was space exploration, one supply chains, for example, one defense, and over 60% of contributions were on defense. So students and young professionals in policies are way more interested in that topic than engineers, maybe. But the main thing is that it shouldn't be a taboo for universities, because just talking about it, about how we can keep our values and stay ethical, like defense doesn't mean always just war. Unfortunately, it's related, but yes, just talking about it makes it less scary, I think, and we need this young generation for the new challenges we have ahead of us.
Thank you. Well, we are arriving at the end of this panel. I want to thank you all for your insights, and I think we all converge towards a path of cooperation and sustainability for Europe. Thank you as well to our audience for your questions and for participating in the polls. When I was listening to you and the fact that Europe needs to have a strong vision and move, in Switzerland we have this saying, from the COVID pandemic, one of our politics says, move as fast as possible, but as slow as necessary. And I guess this is as well the European way. Thank you so much. We can give them a round of applause for your insights. We will now have a 20-minute coffee break, and we will see each other for the next panel on entrepreneurship, New Soul, and hear from the other side of the table.